Good evening. Welcome to the Georgetown School of Continuing Studies in this beautiful spot. I'm going to be a nag and ask those of you that are in the third row to come on down closer. We want to have a conversation instead of a big program. There are seats in the front, and there won't be a collection, so you can feel comfortable. So, Patty, you too, come on down. And actually, in the front row, there's a bunch of seats. So, join us. I am John Carr. I am the founder of the initiative. This is our Latino Leaders Gathering, and this is on strengthening community and resisting individualism, challenges for young Latinos. Obviously, I am not young. I am not Latino, but I am the founder of this, so I get to say hello. We do a lot of good things. Guys, those of you who came, I just made the others come down. So don't be embarrassed. Come on down. We do a lot of wonderful things at the initiative. We do large gatherings of people, famous people. We do gatherings of leaders from across the country. The best things we do is our gatherings of young people. We have a thing called Salt and Light gatherings where young people, Catholics and others under 40, gather at this place and other places. And when we first started that, a group of young Latinos came to me and said, "This is wonderful, and we want to be a part of this. But we need a place. We need a time for ourselves. There's no place where we can really gather and talk about what affects us and who we are and where we're going." And out of that came the Latino Leaders Gatherings. And it's been going for almost 10 years. And candidly, it's I think the most promising thing we do. This is a tough time in our country and our world. And so I'd like to begin with prayer, if that's okay. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Lord God, bless this gathering. Bless our broken world. Bless those who have been lost. In the words of your Son in the Beatitudes, bless those who mourn. Bless those who hunger and thirst for justice. Bless the peacemakers. Bless the mothers and fathers who have lost their children, not only in the Holy Land, but Ukraine and in this city. Bless the children who have lost their mothers and fathers. Bless those who are gathered here. Bless our speakers. Bless this work. Bless our food that we've had and will have, and bless those who prepared this. Bless our time together. All this we ask in the name of Jesus, your Son. Amen. And the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. I'm really excited because of the topic, community resisting individualism. We should make clear that's destructive individualism. You're all individuals. That's a good thing. But when it becomes all you are, that's the problem. And we have a great lineup of people. Deanna, you'll learn, has been involved in lots of things, works at St. Anne's, and is an example, frankly, of community over destructive individualism. Mika is a Hoya. We think that's wonderful. And she also is an example of what we're talking about tonight. And Bishop Avilio is our new bishop in Washington. You'll hear a lot about Bishop Avilio, but something that occurred to me when he was named a bishop, I had known Father Avilio for probably 8-10 years. and I never knew his last name. He was always Father Avilio, always close to us, always standing with us. And so you'll hear about this. Somehow, Pope Francis found him, and we are blessed to have him as our pastor, and we're blessed to have him this night. And Christian, who is our moderator, this is the first time Christian is moderating one of our dialogues. He came here a little more than a year ago, right? Yeah? I told the panel when he asked the question, just say yes. He's going to do a great job. He's a great colleague. He's from Texas. We won't hold that against him. He's worked on the border, and he is a leader in our Latino Leader program. And so I'm honored to turn everything over to Christian. Thank you.
Well, thank you, John, for the kind introduction and for the beautiful prayer there to open us up. Welcome, everyone who's joined us for this conversation, both everybody who's sitting here with us at the School of Continuing Studies and also everybody who's joining the live stream online. I'm Christian. I'm the projects manager here at the Initiative on Catholic Social Thought and Public Life at Georgetown. And we're so grateful to have so many of you with us today. Those of you who are online can join the conversation using the hashtag LatinosAndCommunityGU. And we'll have an opportunity for questions and answers later at the end of the dialogue from our in-person audience here at the School of Continuing Studies. This dialogue is being recorded, and it'll be posted on our website and on our social media channels later for later viewing as well. We often talk about issues that seem beyond our direct influence, problems that are so big that require responses and solutions that may seem out of our reach. But today we're going to do something a little different. Tonight we're going to be talking about something that each of us here can choose to change and to improve directly in our lives and in our communities. The connections in our lives, the togetherness, and the mutual support that characterize the spaces we inhabit and the people we share our lives with. There's a long tradition of solidarity in Catholic social teaching. We're never alone, and we don't exist for our own purposes. We're part of complex communities, which means that we're always relying on and responsible for other people. This basic principle has been increasingly threatened by isolation, both necessary isolation, like what we found during the COVID-19 pandemic, but also a more destructive individualism that's been the focus of Pope Francis's warnings throughout the course of his pontificate. And that's reflected in wasteful consumerism, apathy, and indifference. So tonight we're going to explore how our culture, especially Latino culture, can challenge those trends and offer different values to encourage strong communities. I've seen it in my own life in the way my mother's family comes together in times of difficulty and the way they come together in times of celebration. I've seen it in the way that groups of mothers stuck in Mexican border cities waiting for asylum have banded together so that some can care for the group's children while the others work to provide food. And I've seen it in the concepts of communal labor that are common throughout Latin America. Mano vuelta, tequio, minca, where neighbors support each other today, knowing that they'll be supported by their neighbors tomorrow. And we see it obviously tonight, as young Latinos come together for this evening of good food, drink, and conversation, to connect in a city that can oftentimes feel so isolating. This evening, we have three remarkable people who will tell us how they live this call to community. We have Diana Dow, who works at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, has a master's degree in intercultural and international communication from American University, and is active in the young adult community at St. Anne's Catholic Church right here in Washington, D.C. Mirka Sosa is an immigration paralegal at Wilkes Legal LLC in Tacoma Park, Maryland. And as John mentioned, she's a graduate of Georgetown University. She's also from Texas. While she was at Georgetown, President DeGioia nominated her as a Campus Compact Newman Civic Fellow to recognize her work with immigrants and the Latino community. And finally, we have Bishop Evelio Menjivar. You may have read about Bishop Evelio's remarkable story in the Washington Post. The conclusion to that article read, "A man who arrived in this country in the trunk of a car might be able to help the church find its own path, one that leads to a more hopeful and inclusive future." Bishop Evelio is a Salvadoran immigrant, a pastor, a defender of workers and immigrants, and now he's been chosen by Pope Francis to be a bishop. So Bishop Evelio, you came to this country at the age of 19, as the article said, in the trunk of a car. Now you're the auxiliary bishop of our archdiocese. Can you tell us about that journey, not just to the United States, but the path that led you to become the first Salvadoran bishop in the United States?
Well, I would like to say that life itself is a journey. Yeah. And it is not hard to understand why young people, like I was young when I left El Salvador, leave their countries. If you turn on the TV or the news and check news online, with the horrible wars going on in the world, you realize that for some people, especially young people who live under those conditions, there is no future in their homeland. So that is how more or less I was growing up. I was born in El Salvador, in Chalatenango, and Chalatenango is one of the areas that suffered the most because of the civil war. So at the age of 12, I was 12 years old when we were forced to abandon our village. So we moved to another town, and so I started school there. That was good. I was 13 when I started third grade, and I was 18, almost 19 when I finished ninth grade. So then, obviously, there was not much future in El Salvador for me. Even though I was already thinking about a vocation to the priesthood, I knew that that was not a possibility, that it was not going to be possible to be a priest or to be a professional in my country. So I left family and, what was familiar, and adventure to the north. The first trip, I ended up in Tijuana, and I was deported from there. And then 6 months after, I made it all the way to Guatemala, and then we went back. And then the third time, la tercera es la vencida, right? As we say. The third time, I was able to make it. So just to make the story short, right? I ended up in Los Angeles. I applied for political asylum, and I just got the permit to work. So that's how I stayed for 7 years, just a permit to work, but not being able to go back to El Salvador. So then I moved to Maryland, Hyattsville area, where I still live. And I joined St. Mark's Parish. And that is where I started to be part of the youth group, the prayer group, and it is where my vocation grew. And it is where I found a lot of support. I finished my GED. I was obviously working as a painter and taking classes, English classes and GED classes. So that's how I made it to the seminary. So that was my journey. I mean, it's not much different than the journey of so many young people who come to this country or just move from, Europe, for example, or other countries and look for opportunities. Obviously, I never had an idea or imagined that I was going to be bishop. One day. I was just happy to be priest. And then when I received the call, it was like, wow, I couldn't believe it. But so kind of that's my journey to where I am right now.
And what was that like to get that call telling you that you would be bishop? How did that change your idea of your vocation?
Very scary because, as you said, people have high expectations about bishops. People think that bishop has the power to change the church, the world, and all that. And obviously, perhaps we can do something, but we cannot do it all. So it is very scary. We are living difficult times in the church, as you all know, and it is a great responsibility, a great responsibility. So I say yes, just because I know that todo lo podemos con aquel que nos fortalece. We can do all, with God who gives us the strength to do it. So yeah, it was very scared call, but it was an act of hope at the same time,
So, but before you were bishop, you were a pastor, and you were known for your solidarity with workers and your support of immigrants. And you're still very much known for those two things. Why has your ministry focused on immigrants and workers? And how is that an expression of your faith? And what have you learned from those experiences?
Well, first of all, I am both. I'm an immigrant, and I was, or still perhaps, I'm a labor worker. Now I'm a bishop. The salary is more or less the same. Perhaps I was making more money when I was a painter. So, I had to organize the bishops, perhaps so that we can fight for better
Or
salary.
they just need to donate more on Sundays.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm a bishop, and I'm an immigrant, and I'm a worker. So I understand very much both. So just to advocate for immigrants and workers, it is my passion, yes, but it is also my duty, I would say. So I got involved with this, especially with the labor movement in 2014. Father Click Kyle, he's a great labor priest from Chicago. He invited some of the priests from around the United States to a gathering in Chicago, and it was great. It was eye-opener, to learn about the work that the church has done in this country to support organized labor, and how organized labor has contributed to the well-being of the families, and to raise up, to another level the quality of life of immigrants, and the church has been very supportive. Great priests, great bishops have supported the labor movement, and so now it is our time. It is our time to show solidarity with workers, with immigrants. So I believe it is a privilege, to walk with people, but at the same time, it is also a responsibility that we have. We have to. It's an obligation, to support people in their struggle for a better life.
Mm-hmm. So our theme tonight centers around the importance of community and the dangers of excessive individualism. You've talked a lot about seeing your community as something, it's a duty that you have towards these other people. What advice, what warnings, what encouragement do you have for the young people who are in this room today, and those who are joining us online, about how their faith can lead them to choose family, to choose community over isolation and over destructive individualism?
We know that especially young people now, they are very much desencantados. What is the translation?
Disenchanted.
Yeah, disenchanted with organized religion, also with politics. And it is not because they don't like it. It is not because they don't want to be part, but perhaps it's a sign of protest for the way that we are, doing religion, doing politics, because we kind of just make them consumers of a product that is already prefabricated in a way, and they perhaps young people don't feel part of religion. They don't feel engaged. They don't engage with in politics precisely because they don't have much to say. So it is not that they don't want to get involved. It is because perhaps again we kind of just put them aside and we just offer them a final product. So what I believe is that we need to engage the youth, engage people, so that you feel part of a faith, of your communities, of society. So yes, we live in a time when individualism breeds, in a way, feeds from kind of a culture of narcissism. Not in the sense that we don't have to take care of ourselves and all that, but in the sense that we become very self-referential, self-absorbed, and we don't look towards others. And I would say that the church, offers great opportunities because, first of all, there is no mass without solidarity, without coming together. The idea of private masses, for example, when the priest would go just to a corner, to an altar and celebrate mass, that's not what the church tells us that mass is. Mass is coming together in community. So the first aspect of a mass, of the Eucharist, is solidarity, is coming together. That is what Jesus said. So the church offers us great opportunities to build up community, to build up solidarity, and that is how I experience church. When I came into the United States, I was alone, and was young, but I didn't have family. I did not come with family. I came with my brother, but my brother was working, doing his own things. So I found a family in the church and great support. So if I am now where I am, it is because I joined a great community. And that community became like a family for me. So, I would say that that's important. And then we had to engage with the rest of the community because, again, we cannot be just self-absorbed in our church, in our small community. No, we had to, somebody say, we had to just keep dreaming, but at the same time, we have to keep the other eye, has to be open. So yes, we dream, but at the same time, we had to look at reality, and the church give us that opportunity. But it doesn't have to be just church. It has to be any forms of communities where we can belong and where we can contribute, as individuals. Fatima was telling me, yes, we need balance, yes, we have to be individuals, but at the same time, have that sense that we are not islands, as human beings.
Well, that's a great time, I think, to come over to you, Diana, to think about how the church is our community, because as we mentioned earlier, you're really a leader in building up that community. But before we get into that, I want to ask you the same question I just asked Bishop Evelio, which is, in your life broadly, what drives you to choose community over isolation, and what are the pressures that you have to resist? What advice, warnings, or encouragement do you have for all of us?
So I think God created us to be social beings. We crave connection, and I think that's something that I learned throughout my life. And some of my own drivers have been that desire to connect and that desire to belong, that desire to have a purpose serving others. beyond myself. And it's something that I learned growing up in a huge family, a huge Latin family. Both my mom's and my dad's side, I was born in Colombia, South America, and my mom's and my dad's side, they both are huge. I mean, I have cousins, second cousins, aunts, uncles, and it's just their friends are kind of like our family, and their friends are friends. And I just grew up with this large community that showed me a sense of belonging and a sense of celebrating the good things and being there for the bad moments, supporting us through the tough times. And so in a way, all of that taught me a lot about community and seeking that community, especially when we moved, when I was a teenager, we moved to the US, to a rural town, a small town, North Carolina, not very diverse. And I saw my parents seek the community. They were an example for me of how to go about seeking community, how to not isolate yourself and seek the community through the church and through nonprofits and organizations that they were a part of. And that also served as an example for me in the future when I moved abroad or moved to a different location, when I lived by myself. It really, I mean, it's never easy. There's always those pressures that you want to, go to what's familiar, to maybe stay at home and watch Netflix or those soap operas that you used to watch with your grandma, or, whatever that might be, that remind you of home. And it's just that desire to stick to what's familiar. But it's when you get out of that comfort zone and you push out of it and try to reach out and connect with people, it's when the magic happens and when you really form community. And I feel like I see it time and time again, whether it was, especially here in DC, where it's so competitive and it's all about self and about me, and about my career, my life, and what I get out of the city and the networking. There's so much about networking in the city, but we have to look beyond that and look more about making true connections and true, just seeking that sense of belonging beyond just the workplace. And I feel like moving to a new city as a teenager taught me a lot, seeing my parents. And then also a big thing was serving in the Peace Corps and seeing the volunteers. I did 2 years in the Peace Corps. So Peace Corps service is a commitment that you do in a rural community for 2 years. A lot of times it's without internet, without water, without access to power. A lot of the time it's something that's very unfamiliar to many people. So a lot of the volunteers that thrived in those communities and in that service were volunteers that actually made an effort to get out of the comfort zone and try to connect and try to embrace the culture and embrace the language. A lot of them didn't speak the language, but it was those volunteers that made an effort, that really tried to get out there and leave the comfort zone. And it was the volunteers that chose not to do that, that had a hard time and maybe even went into depression or anxiety, maybe even left the Peace Corps service or maybe stayed, but it was a horrible experience and very, very, just very isolating in a sense. And they sought what was comfortable. So sometimes they would seek volunteers that spoke English, that related to their culture. And so seeing that experience has taught me a lot, especially moving back to DC and kind of creating that community and seeking the community and not isolation.
Yeah, so one of those communities that you're very involved with, of course, is the St. Anne's Young Adult Group at your parish in Tenleytown.
Yeah.
So how does the closeness of that particular group serve to cultivate kind of a broader community within the parish? How has this ministry shaped the way also that you view your own role within that parish community and your broader community?
So it's really been beautiful to see how the community has been built throughout the years around this young adult community at St. Anne, and seeing how it's grown thanks to St. John Society that came a few years back, and they just really helped it grow. a lot of the local leaders as well, and they made a difference. It really went from Tuesday talks and 7 p.m. masses with St. John Society to more structured events through this organized group called the ARC. And with the ARC, it's just taken it to another level. It's been amazing to see the sense of community through not just the Tuesday talks or 7 p.m. mass. We do small group sessions on Tuesdays. We do First Friday holy hours that are followed by amazing socials. And if you haven't been, you gotta try it. And we do retreats for just men, just women, or combined. We have a variety of socials after Mass as well. Every third Sunday after Mass, we go to Guapos. It's a Mexican restaurant nearby. And then we have seasonal socials that helps also create community. We go skiing or to wineries, fall festivals. And then we also do volunteer work through something we call Works of Mercy. So it's really an all-encompassing community that has grown. And when you go to these events, you just feel this joy that is very contagious and that it makes you feel like you belong and it makes you want to come back. And it's really unique. It's something that it even goes beyond just the structured events. We've become a community celebrating each other's milestones, whether it's birthdays, graduations, interviews for a new job. We've gone to each other's weddings and we've gone to funerals. We've been there for the tough times, for tough conversations and stressful moments. So it's really gone beyond just the structure of what was created for just the Mass or just a talk on a Tuesday. We sometimes even, there's groups actually that, it's a group all over DC that goes to Tinleytown or the DMV area. But throughout their week, you see a lot of people actually going to Mass together. So there's a group of people that work in the DuPont area and they'll just meet up for noon Mass in between, during their lunchtime. Right. Or they'll just go to Bethesda for an early Mass before going to work. So you really see this community just forming and really get to know each other and really be there for each other. And in a way, you asked about my role, and I feel like, so much has been given to me, and I felt so welcome in this community from the get-go, that I just feel like I have to give that back and be that welcoming person for the new folks that come on, and in a way help them feel also welcome and create that space. My husband and I, actually, he's here on the front row.
He's one of the brave ones.
Yeah, so we actually have hosted events at our place outside of the regular structured events, and we've had birthday parties, we've had graduations for folks that have graduated together. We've had just impromptu weekend activities, just a variety of things that really has helped us create a deeper community and a sense of family away from home for a lot of us that come to DC just to work and study and don't have our families here.
Yeah. So you've done excellent work building community with St. Anne's. You mentioned your work with the Peace Corps as well. In all of your work, what are some of the greatest challenges that you've seen in building and sustaining community, and how have you seen people deal with those challenges?
So I feel like we can be very comfortable sometimes in the community that we have, and it's always been this way, so we'll just keep it this way. But there are some setbacks with that, and it really keeps us from sustaining the community and helping it grow to its full potential and what it could be, and really making sure that it's also inclusive. And so I remember at AARP when I was there, the focus was more on just being there for the elderly in general, just this general idea of who the elderly was. They had specific focus groups or specific groups that created spaces for the African American elderly, for the Hispanic, LGBTQ, for the Asian American veterans. So they had all of these designated teams, hired teams that were focused on all of these diverse groups, creating that inclusivity. In my current job at USDA, at the Department of Ag, there's also that sense of community. It's a massive organization, so I speak from my experience in the commodity procurement. But when the pandemic happened, a lot of issues came within communities. There was a lot of vulnerable families that were struggling to put food on the table. And USDA was very creative in putting this program together that helped partner communities that were in need with farmers that had all this excess food that was just going to waste. And so in the end created this program to put this excess food in boxes, send it to food banks, and have people go to the food banks and pick up this free box. And so it's just kind of reinventing the wheel with whatever happens in the world and making sure that the community is taken care of.
Well, and so Mirka, now I want to turn to you, and I want to start with the same question that I've asked the other two, which is what drives you to choose community over isolation, and what are the pressures that you have to resist, and what advice and what warnings do you have for the rest of us here?
Yeah, so I am a recent graduate of Georgetown, and as someone that is starting my professional career right now, I have been doing a lot of self-reflection, and one aspect of that self-reflection is, what is my community, or what do I want to prioritize right now in terms of like the intersection of my career, of my community, of my mental health, etc. And I know now, as someone that's not living in a college campus anymore, it's very hard to build community and keep in touch with that community because when I was in college, I had these opportunities to volunteer, and one of the main things that I participated in were tutoring programs for low-income migrant students in the DMV area. Well, yes, that's still a possibility now. I could seek those out, but I also have to think about my capacity. And even though, yes, I'm working right now as a paralegal at an immigration law firm, I do have to recognize, my capacity is different. And maybe I'm doing more stuff behind the scenes, but that also means that in order to make these connections with people, I have to find different avenues of connection. And that's also been a point of conversation with some of my peers. I know that as graduating college did give me social mobility as someone who is the first in their family to attend college and coming from a low-income background. And so when I was in Georgetown, being surrounded by hyper-competitive environment was I think that was one of the setbacks of wanting to find community. And obviously that's one of the stressors that I faced. And I just had to continuously remind myself when everything goes wrong or when I'm having hard times, who are the people that are there for me? And this may be like your biological family, your chosen family, or whatever it is, but I constantly have to remind myself of the importance of my community, not only the community that I made in school, but the community that I worked with throughout school and the community that I'm working with now as a paralegal. And yeah, I just think it's very important to, because even though it's really hard now, I sometimes I do feel a little isolated from my community. You have to take that extra step to really connect and really pay attention to your positionality within your environment and really reach out.
Yeah, so we've had you, this is not your first dialogue with us. We had you it was our first in-person dialogue back after the COVID lockdown. And the focus of that dialogue was to talk about how the pandemic affected our communities. Diana, you just shared a really beautiful example of how people kind of came together to think creatively, to deal with new problems that arose out of the pandemic. And Mirka, in that dialogue, you talked about some of the difficulties that your community faced during the pandemic and how you kind of stepped up to deal with them. You talked about how you often translated public health information for your family because it wasn't readily available in Spanish. And you also talked about how you had to work more closely with elementary school students who were very quickly falling behind because they didn't have regular access to Wi-Fi. So how did the hardships of the pandemic move you to participate more fully in your community? And why did you see this as an opportunity to strengthen the bonds of your community and your participation in it, rather than kind of this thing that would have caused more isolation?
Yeah, so I remember in that panel, I talked a little bit about inaccessibility to technology. And I mean, I think as a collective, as a general like U.S. community, we have kind of forgotten these things that we talked about were being highlighted by the pandemic. For example, like talking about low wages for essential workers or access to technology. These are still needs that are not being met, but I think that the pandemic really allowed us to recognize that there are different avenues of connection. I mean, like that's when we started to use Zoom a lot more and like different forms of video chat. And I mean, it's really important to think about how these things have helped us, but we need to also start thinking about how we can use these resources to tackle some of the issues we were talking about 2 years ago that you know we're not talking about now. And yeah,
I think that's a really important point, that there's kind of this starting point, and now it's our opportunity to move beyond it. And I think, especially when we think about community, a lot of our present moment is knowing this community that is far beyond us, this globalized community, and there are responsibilities there too. So I think that's an opportunity to talk more broadly about culture and how it is that our culture, which is this big collective experience or phenomenon, can guide us here. So what the responses that you just talked about, the reasons you got more involved in your community, what does this have to do with culture? How has culture shaped those responses? And how do you hope that those responses will shape the culture in the communities that you're a part of?
Yeah, okay, so when thinking about culture, I think about like what I grew up around. So my parents both immigrated from Guatemala, so I grew up in a heavily, and in Texas, so I grew up in a heavily like Central American and Mexican environment where the norm was collectivism. And then coming to Georgetown and being in a hyper competitive environment and facing individualism, it just formed a lot of culture crash in my head, and it was something that took me a long time to really come to terms with. And I mean, one thing, however, like I think through going through all of this, I've again with the self-reflection, I've been thinking about the balance that is needed, because yes, looking at, like we are our own people and we need to look after ourselves, but we also need to look after each other, and I mean, burnout is very real. I experienced that a lot when I was a Georgetown student, and it was to a point where I kind of just gave up, and I realized that you have to really find that balance of caring for others, but caring for yourself too, or else there will be a point where you cannot, you don't have the capacity to care for others, not necessarily care for others, but you don't have the capacity to participate in your community. So as I said, it's something that I'm still reflecting on, and I mean, a lot of my friends from Georgetown were also first and low income Latinx or Latinos. So this is still an ongoing conversation that's being had, very like both in informal and formal settings that I have these conversations, and I mean, I'm still finding that balance. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, so now we'll open up the conversation a little bit among the group here. And you mentioned something, Mirka, about growing up in this more communal environment. And that's something that, Diana, you kind of alluded to as well when you talked about this big family and kind of extended family and friends that were part of the family, you know, that you had talked about before. there's that experience of a much more communal environment. So I want to ask you a question along those lines, and then bring it back to Bishop Evelio as well. But to start with you, Diana, how can a more communal cultural experience inform our experiences of faith? What is it about these communal cultural experiences? What does it do to the way that we experience our faith?
I think this made me think a lot about when I first moved to High Point and the importance of being true to myself and my Latino heritage. I feel there's that. It's very different to grow up Latino in Latin America than in rural North Carolina. And so I think it was those communal cultural experiences, sharing my culture through faith in a way with some of my high school friends. I think I was the only Latina in my high school at the time. Wow. Maybe there was one other one. Maybe, I can't even remember. And so I remember actually sharing my culture and my faith with some of my freshman friends in high school, and I actually invited them over to my house for a novena. A novena, it's a very cultural Colombian prayer that you do 9 days before Christmas, 9 days leading up to Christmas. Every night you get together, and it's just a big gathering with family and friends. You do prayers, you eat delicious Colombian treats, and you sing Christmas songs. And so that was a way for me to, at first I was actually I was embarrassed because it's a lot of like little kid songs, and we still do it as adults. And it, as a teenager, very self-conscious, of course, of what are my friends gonna say, or I don't know. It was just a very difficult experience to decide whether to do it or not, or to share that. And I think from being able to share that cultural experience, that faith together with my friends, I think it was a deeper relationship moving forward and starting high school together. And that was my experience, but it was similar for my siblings. They were older, and for my parents, because not everybody that came to the novena was Colombian. So it was also sharing with people from El Salvador, Guatemala, Mexico, and them actually hosting, different folks from different countries hosting at their house every night for 9 days. So it was a beautiful experience to share.
So that's Diana just shared obviously a beautiful story about an experience of communal prayer and how culture contributed to that. I want to focus now with you, Bishop Evelio, on a different aspect of our faith, and it's one that you talked about earlier when you talked about your attitude towards your community as being a responsibility, and your involvement in the labor movement and the need for solidarity, and how solidarity is the basis of the Mass. How does this communal expression of faith translate into kind of a social responsibility? How do we draw the principles of Catholic social teaching from that experience of community in the context of prayer and of our faith?
From knowing that we are social beings and that we are called to live in community, we need to develop a good sense of the common good. The common good. What is the common good? The common good is a sense that, what happens outside my own house or affects me. And therefore, I have to contribute to make the surroundings better. It's very easily we can isolate ourselves, and we can isolate the family, we can isolate the clan, la tribu, but then we forget about the rest. So it is so important to develop a sense of the common good, and the church has a long tradition of proposing precisely that we cannot just try to better ourselves and our family, but that as we enhance and we enrich, as we create a sense of well-being for others, everybody in a way is enriched. So I think that is very important. And so our faith itself, invite us to do precisely that, to work for the common good. And some societies, just create precisely enclosed communities, and then inside that community, that compound is safe, beautiful, clean. But then as soon as you get out of that compound and that enclosed community, obviously you realize that not everybody is living in that, in the way that you live. So creating a sense of common good means we are going to work together to make not only my life better, but the life of everybody, So that is very important. So when we realize that we depend also on a community, and therefore I don't have to just grab for myself things and resources, but I had to think about others and even about the new generation. So that's why the Pope is inviting us to care for our common home.
Right.
Right.
Well, thank you. Now we can open it up to questions here from the audience. If anybody has any question for any of the panelists, we have Shayna and Kim in the back who will be bringing microphones around. So just raise your hand and we'll bring you a microphone. If you could introduce yourself and then state your question, and I will repeat what my greatest instructor, John Carr, has said many times. It's wonderful to ask the question in the form of a question.
Hi, my name is Floyd Palmer, and my question to you is, I've experienced a lot of what you all are talking about, because when the pandemic shut down, I had the rare privilege to work for World Central Kitchen, and we did like 900,000 plus meals in 6.5 months. And all I can say is, if I had known that we're going to do that amount of meal, I probably wouldn't have signed up. But something happened after like about the third week is when I found out that it was bigger than myself, that I didn't get tired the whole time. Even though the buses weren't running, you had to catch cabs, Ubers, and everything. And being around Jose Andres and having an example of not definition, but execution of somebody that's driven for the better part of making everyone else's lives better was a priceless experience to me. So I'm just glad that you all shared your testimony with me. Thank you.
Great. Anybody else have a question? Over here. Yep.
Hi, my name is Luis. Thank you so much for all the great information, your stories as well. Diana, I relate so much to you. I'd say that I love helping with the community. I try to be out there as much as I can, especially to the youth. When Bishop Velio left St. Mary's Catholic Church in Landover Hills, I actually became the coordinator for religious education with the students. So it's a big thing for me. Bishop Velio has done a lot for the community and me as well, a big role model. But one question that I do have, and I heard just a little bit of you saying that you were sharing the novena with others. It was a bit of a challenge. So I guess my question would be, what would you say to the youth who are scared to share their faith to others in today's day?
I think I struggled a lot with my identity as a teenager, and I feel like being around other youth that were going through the same thing and going to youth group, that was a big thing for me. Not just necessarily youth that had gone through struggles like I had, but it was a mix of people. And so being with other youth that cared for their faith in a way showed me how to share my faith and be comfortable sharing my faith. Because like I said, I was the only Latina, and a lot of these youth group sessions were with Americans from the South that they were very welcoming because the South is very welcoming. But at the same time, they were very different from me. But they were so passionate about sharing their faith that I learned so much in those youth group. Going to these retreats, that it kind of made me more comfortable sharing the novena with other folks. But it wasn't always easy. I think also talking and not keeping, whenever I was uncomfortable, oh, sorry about that. Whenever there was an uncomfortable moment or a culture shock moment or something that just didn't feel right, I always had someone that I trusted that I could turn to. And being able to have that space to voice those feelings, whether it's a parent, a friend, a counselor. I remember I would go a lot to my French teacher. That was the one person that I could relate to because he was the only other immigrant in a way in the school. And I remember going to him for French questions, but then also for cultural questions and like voicing my stress of not being understood as, this different person in a classroom in different ways. So being able to have that space with anybody that you feel comfortable with is very important.
Any other questions?
Yes, thank you very much. That's great. I'm Father Jack O'Hara, retired priest of Arlington, and I'm here with my friend Father Pedro Mateo Valdez from the Dominican Republic in the diocese that borders Haiti. So my question is, for all of you, what hope do you have for the Synod that decisions will be made there that will help advance the spread of the faith among our young people and to empower them to live and enjoy and practice our faith?
Bishop Evelio, maybe we'll shoot that one to you.
Well, the synod is another way of being church. The Pope is calling for a church that listens. So kind of we are doing here a synodal session. So a church that listens, and a church that listens, above all, I will say with the heart. I guess it is Lumen Gentium that says that the church needs to feel, not only listen, but feel the hope, the joys, but also the pains and the sorrow of the people of our time. So we need to be that church because we are the body of Christ. And the body of Christ himself was one who listened to others. Hear the cry of, the poor of his time. So I think there is great hope. Obviously, change, takes time. But Pope Francis is inviting us precisely to do that. Not just to change the structures or the doctrines, but to change our attitudes. Our attitudes. So I think there is much hope, for the church. It's going to be a church, I would say, that is more sensitive, a church that is more close to those people struggling, more open, to differences in a way. We may not agree with everything or with people, but we can show solidarity, and then we can just put ourselves in the shoes of others. That is what we do when we listen stories. We start making ours the pain and the joys. So I would say that there is a great hope,
Well, great. Yeah. So there's a process of listening together and of engaging together, kind of in a common movement, right? So before we close, I want to go back one more time to all of you for one very quick last word. In 30 seconds, what's one step or one action you want to encourage people in this room or those watching online to take in light of this conversation? And maybe we'll start with you, Deanna.
Sure. I would say don't be afraid to reach out, especially when you're at your lowest. That's when you really need to reach out and seek out that community.
Great. Mirka?
I would say definitely take a breath and look into yourself and think about your capacity and do what you are in capacity to do to really uplift communities that have been historically marginalized.
Bishop Velio?
Well, if you are not going to Mass, go back to Mass. Engage in a community that will uplift you, that will support you, and that will strengthen you to do the great work that God has for you. You know, just find a like-minded community. You know, sometimes people say, I don't go to church because, well, go to another parish, you know, or something like that. So I would say, you know, don't isolate yourself. You know, we are kind of capable of doing big things. Obviously, you know, not so much if we are just going to be carrying all the weight by ourselves. But if we come together, if we join others, then we can do great things.
Well, and that's a great note to end on. But before we close, I want to preview some of our upcoming dialogues and gatherings. We'll continue this conversation about isolation and community on November 2nd, when we'll be hosting the Washington, D.C. premiere of the documentary Join or Die, which is a film about why you should join a club and why the fate of America depends on it. The premiere will be followed by a reception and then a public dialogue on isolation or community, social connection in America, with Professor Robert Putnam, whose groundbreaking Bowling Alone research is featured in the film, along with other great panelists. On November 14th, we're holding a Dahlgren Dialogue in partnership with our colleagues at the Office of Mission and Ministry at Georgetown that will be talking about solidarity with Jesuits in the Catholic Church in Nicaragua. For those of you who are here in the DC area, we'd love for you to join us in person for both of these dialogues, but they'll also be live streamed for those who are unable to attend or unable to come to Washington. So please visit our website in the coming days for more information and to RSVP to those conversations. I want to give a big thanks to my colleagues, Kim Daniels, John Carr, Kim Mazik, back there, and Anna Gordon for helping to put together this wonderful conversation. And I want to thank all of you for joining us, both all of you here at Georgetown and those who are watching on the live stream. And finally, I want us all to join in thanking our wonderful panelists, Diana, Mirka, and Bishop Emilio.